Welcome back. Contractor groups are already warning of the impact the shutdown will have on the contracting base. Those groups remind Congress that dozens of companies lost workers and even went out of business after the 2019 shutdown. Soraya Correa is president and CEO of National Industries for the Blind. She's former Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Soraya, welcome. Thanks for joining me. You were DHS during the 2013 shutdown. What's your callback to what you saw happen in the aftermath of that shutdown, when you went back to the agency and when you started reaching out to your vendors to kind of get everything back on track?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Certainly there was an impact to the workforce out there, the vendor community, as well as in the government, believe it or not, because some of the newer employees that came in, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, they can't afford to lose a paycheck, and so some of them left government. Similarly with industry, if you're not working, industry can only carry people for so long. Some organizations might have administrative funds that they might be able to charge to, but over time they are going to lose people, and people are going to go work in other locations. We did see an impact. The good news is essential employees, of course, are working. They're working without a check. Those are easier to keep, but regular businesses, especially small businesses, tend to be impacted pretty heavily during a shutdown.
And the impact of that resulted in what to the agency, and could potentially this time result in what to the agency?
Generally speaking, what you're going to see are delays in the work, because when the contractor comes back, they got to staff up again, they got to get people on board, you got to get those people cleared, got to get them trained if they're not already trained in the work. So generally speaking, it's what you're going to see is a slowdown in the work, right? Which in a way might be good, because the government folks are coming back and trying to catch up just where they left off and what's been piling on their desk. Because interestingly enough, even though you're on a furlough, there's still work ongoing. When you talk about essential work, you're focused on the things that have to get done. The routine and recurring is piling up.
You were in an organization that has such a wide variety of missions, mission sets, the types of people that stay, folks that were exempted, folks that weren't exempted. What does that mean for somebody that's coming back to a little bit of everything as far as managing through the reopening process?
So from a leader's perspective, the first thing you got to do is reorient your staff. You got to bring your team together. Morale's already going to be shot because you've been on a shutdown. So you got to bring your team together and kind of rebuild that morale, energize them again, and tell them what the priorities are. It's really important that from a leadership perspective, you lay down what are the priorities, what do we need to focus on, what are the big rocks that we have to move, so to speak. And then the other thing I would also say is, from an employee standpoint, you need to immediately start reaching out to your vendors, because as you start to lift stop work orders, you got to notify your vendors so that they can come back, give you their proposal for any delays they encounter, any additional costs, etc., and how they're going to get started back up. So there's a lot of work to be done. I would say the most important thing is you got to be patient with yourself, right? Because you're not going to solve all the problems at once. You got to maintain good communications. This is where your network, your work network, is extremely important. As the Chief Procurement Officer at DHS, one of the people that I relied on very, very heavily was my Chief Financial Officer, of course my General Counsel, to make sure that we didn't do anything crazy, but also my CIO. Because the other thing you got to think about is systems. Are there updates to the networks? What has to happen next? So you got to sit down and kind of plan it out, meet with that leadership team, and then flow that down to your staff. The most important thing that I always try to tell leaders is stay in tune with your staff as they're coming back, because they're already hurt. You know, it's painful. It is painful when you go through a shutdown, and so you want to maintain constant communications, make sure they understand what are priorities, make sure they're well informed of what's going on, and if you don't know the answer to a question, just say, I don't know, I will go out and find out for you.
What I think is most striking to me, as I'm connecting what you're saying to what I talked to folks about in the wake of the 2019 shutdown, is the folks that got back up to speed the fastest were the folks that didn't focus on process and procedure.
Correct.
They were the people that focused on the stuff that you just talked about,
Exactly.
which is, where's my workforce? What are they thinking about? How are they doing?
Right.
And how can I help them get back up to speed as quickly
And what are
as
my
possible?
priorities?
Yeah.
You got to prioritize the work. In other words, you can't do everything at once. So you got to sit down and think about it and prioritize. What are we going to work on first? What are the things that we really got to take care of right away? And how do we deal with that backlog, right? Because you're going to still have a backlog of work. How are we going to address that? But the most important thing is talk to your people, talk to your people, talk to your people. You will always hear me say that, because I think it's extremely important that you maintain that communications. And even during the shutdown, people are listening to the news and, they're hearing all kinds of stuff. I think it's really important when you can to keep people informed. You can put out informational messages that say, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, here's what's not happening. Because there is a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of speculation, and I think it's important for employees to be kept informed.
When you talk about establishing priorities, I imagine that in the wake of something like this is rather fluid also, because you might find the thing that you want to do first, that vendor's not ready to help you yet. Is that a fair observation?
That's a fair observation. Usually when I'm referring to the priorities, is the priorities of the agency.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing to start up? Because you've issued stop work orders on contracts, so you have to think about what are the contracts that I really need to start up right away, because remember, you're not going to have funds flowing on day one. That's not the way it works. So you have to think about what are the things that have to be funded first, what's important to our secretary, to the administration, and then also what can vendors do. You're going to have a great deal of patience talking to vendors, because they too have to do some planning. They have to think about how are they going to shift resources around. One of the things that I've always found about the vendor community, they're focused on mission just as we are. And so they're going to think about where can I move resources around to better support you to get started back up. So it's extremely important that line of communication is just so important and so vital.
Final thought, what did you do after the 2013 shutdown that you think set you up for the most amount of success or helped you get back to normal as quickly as possible, Soraya?
So I think the most important thing that I did, of course, like I said, prioritize, communicate, but then I also documented lessons learned. I said, let's think about it now while it's fresh in our heads. As we're doing all this work, let's take some time to think about what didn't we do that we should have done? What did we do that we probably didn't need to do? And what are the things that, if I could do it over again, how would I do it differently? I think it's extremely important to take a little bit of time to do lessons learned. I can't tell you the value of that. And also, believe it or not, it also helps you kind of relieve some of the stress of the shutdown, because you get an opportunity to kind of whine and get it out of the way, but really document what you learned so that the next time you're better prepared. Just a quick comment. Since 1996, we've been dealing with, CRs, and we've had, 3 major shutdowns. I think it's 3 major shutdowns. And we've had little shutdowns. I think it's important to understand this is almost becoming a way of life. I hate to say that, but it is. So let's make sure that we continue to learn from it, document those lessons so that each one is a little bit smoother, a little bit easier to take. Although they are never easy, it's a painful process.
Soraya, it's always great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can read more about contractors and acquisition during the shutdown and after on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com.